right, so now that we've reviewed some Algebra 1 concepts on the basic properties of exponents, our Algebra 2 content for today is going to be talking about rational exponents. So rational, if you remember, rational numbers mean that they can be written as a ratio or a fraction. So now our exponents are going to be in the form of a fraction. And we will also see that those rational exponents can be written as roots as well. And so you're familiar with square roots, but today we're going to learn about roots other than square roots, such as third roots, fourth roots, fifth roots, sixth roots, etc. So generically, these are called nth roots, some number n that we are taking the root of our expression. So our n value is going to be an integer that's bigger than 1. So we're not going to deal with negatives with this n. And a, the base, is going to be a real number. So we're going to divide this into two basic categories. One is when n is even, and the other is when n is odd. And so if n is an even integer, so n is 2 or 4 or 6, let's go ahead and just kind of write this real quick. We have n here, and we have our a value here. So if n is even, but our a value is less than 0, so it's a negative number, then we're not going to have any real roots in that case. We will have some imaginary roots, but not real roots. Because remember, anytime that you have a negative sign under a radical, such as whenever we were taking, say, square root of -4, we have to deal with the negative separately and use an I, an imaginary unit, so it's no longer a real number. If a is equal to 0, so something like this, we have a 0 here and some even number here. So if n is 2 or n is 4, we've got 0 times 0 times 0 times 0, that's still going to be 0. And finally, if a is greater than 0, so it's a positive number, we're going to have two roots because we could have a positive or negative version. And so our roots will be plus, and we would evaluate a raised or taken to the nth root, and then we would also have a minus. Notice that this radical can be rewritten as a rational exponent, a ratio or a fraction, and the n value, this root right here, gets placed in the denominator of that fraction. Now, when n is odd, we are always going to just have one real root. So remember, when it's even, we could have none, 1, or 2, but when it's odd, it's always going to be 1. And that root is just simply going to be evaluating the nth root of a. If a is less than 0, then it just means that our root is going to be a negative number, just like a is. If a is equal to 0, we will get 0 as a result. And if a is greater than 0, we will get a positive number. Just like we're starting with, we will get a positive number for our result. And again, we can write the expression in our rational exponent form. So for our first example, n is equal to 3 and a is equal to -216. So we want to note that our n is odd, and since we have an odd n number, remember that we are always going to just have one real root no matter what. So even though a is less than 0, as long as we're odd, we know we're going to have one real root. And in this case, it's going to be one real third root because n is 3. And so if we write this in our root form, our radical form, we will put our n value here, 3, and we will say -216. So we need to ask ourselves, what could we multiply by itself 3 times to get negative 216. We know it's going to be a negative number, but what negative number? Let's take a look at Desmos Scientific Calculator, and we'll use that to evaluate. All right, here we are in the Desmos Scientific Calculator. You can get there by going to desmos.com and under Math Tools, select the drop-down Scientific Calculator, or you can go directly there, desmos.com/scientific. Either way, once you're there, what we want to do is select the nth root and put in our number here, our n value, and then our a value underneath the radical, so negative 216, and we get an answer of negative 6. Let's go report that back in our notes. All right, so when we evaluated the third root of negative 216, we determined using Desmos that our answer was negative 6. You could prove that to yourself in your calculator. Take negative 6 and multiply it by itself 3 times. So negative 6 times negative 6 times negative 6, you will get negative 216. Now let's look at problem number 2. So now our n value is 4, which is an even number. And remember, when we're even, we could have none, 1, or 2 roots. We have an a value that is greater than 0, so that means we will have 2 roots, both a positive and a negative. So a is greater than 0, and that means that we will have 2 real roots, and those will be fourth roots. So let's write this in our radical form like this. We want the fourth root of 81. And this is going to be something that is a positive and a negative, and we need to figure out what that something is. What can we multiply by itself 4 times and get 81? You may come up with the answer by yourself, but if not, let's go to Desmos and evaluate. Okay, here we are in Desmos, and we want to do the nth root again. This time our n value is 4, and the number under the radical is 81. And notice that it gives us an answer of 3. Desmos is only going to report the positive version. However, as we've discussed, we could also have negative 3's, and if we multiply negative 3 by itself 4 times, negative 3 times negative 3 gives us a positive 9. That's one pair. And then we have another pair of negative 3's that will also give us a positive 9. Overall, a positive 81. So let's go back to our notes, but we will need to note that it is a positive and a negative 3. So we're a little smarter than Desmos is. Okay, here we are back in our notes, and we know that we need a positive and negative version of the number that we got when we evaluated in Desmos, and so that is a plus and a minus 3 as our final answer.